What was in those eyes wasn't supposed to be in a wild animal. Jack Wilson had never seen a grizzly bear cry in his 20 years of wildlife photography. The light of dusk pierces through the coniferous forests on the outskirts of Montana's Yellowstone, gilding everything with a layer of gold. Jack is packing up his professional photography gear and getting ready to wrap up the day. Today is the last location shoot for his North American Predator series, and tomorrow he can return to his studio in Denver to begin post-production. As a contributing photographer for National Geographic, Jack has spent 3 weeks in the field, documenting the rhythm of life in this primeval forest. "Goodbye, old friends," Jack whispered to the forest, carefully placing the last shot in a waterproof bag. He loved the moments of solitude, just him and nature, no deadlines for editors, no social media notifications, just the rustle of the wind through the pine trees and the occasional owl cry in the distance. Yellowstone has already begun to cool in October, and the evening temperature drops rapidly. Jack put on his faded red jacket, scrambled his gear, and walked down the familiar trail toward the makeshift camp 3 miles away. The last shade of orange-red in the sky was gradually replaced by a deep blue, and several early stars had quietly appeared. Just then, an unusual sound came from the bushes on the right. Jack immediately stopped and turned alarmingly. His hand instinctively reached for the bear spray on his waist. Grizzly encounters are not uncommon in this area, especially during the season when they are accumulating fat for hibernation. The bushes shook a few times, then parted. A gigantic grizzly bear slowly emerged, its fur shimmering golden brown in the setting sun. Jack estimated it to weigh at least 800 pounds and was an adult male grizzly bear. According to common sense, he should step back slowly, avoid direct gaze, and give the king of the forest plenty of space and respect. But something is wrong. The grizzly bear does not display any aggressive or territorial defensive posture. It stood there with its front paws hanging at its sides, its head slightly lowered, and it looked almost hesitant. What's even stranger is that it looks directly into Jack's eyes, which is extremely rare among wild bears. "Hey, big guy," Jack whispered, his hand still on the bear spray, "let's go our separate ways, okay?" Grizzly tilted his head, as if to understand Jack's words. Then, it did something that completely changed Jack's perception. It let out a low whimper, lifted a huge claw, and gently brushed its eyes. Jack blinked, unable to believe what he was seeing. The hair around the grizzly bear's eyes was wet and shiny. It couldn't be morning dew or rain, it was sunny all day today. "This can't be," muttered Jack, lowering his backpack and discreetly pulling out his camera. Through the telephoto lens, he could clearly see, there was indeed liquid flowing out of the behemoth's eyes. A crying grizzly bear. Even more shockingly, Grizzly took a step forward and then stopped, as if inviting Jack to follow. It turned, took a few steps, and then looked back at Jack with something in his eyes that Jack had never seen in any wild animal, an almost human intent and request. Jack felt a chill climb down his spine, but not out of fear. For 20 years, he has been searching for evidence that animals have emotions and intelligence beyond their instincts. And now, standing in front of him is perhaps the most incredible illustration of all, a grizzly bear that seems to be asking for human help. The night is getting darker and the temperature in the forest continues to drop. Jack knew he should return to camp immediately, following every rule of survival in the wild and wildlife interaction. But those eyes. Those eyes with tears in their eyes. It's as if it's telling some kind of emergency that Jack can't ignore. Grizzly whimpered again, the pain in his voice almost heartbreaking. It took a few more steps forward, then looked back at Jack again, as if to say, "Please follow me." Jack stands still, torn apart by professional training and inner intuition, confronted with a choice that could change his life. Jack Wilson stood on the edge of the taiga, his heart warring so hard he could barely breathe. 20 years of experience in the field warned loudly in his mind, don't follow wild grizzly bears, especially at dusk, when you're alone. It violated every safety guideline he followed during his time at National Geographic, and every piece of knowledge he learned as a wildlife biology major at the University of Colorado. "It's totally insane," Jack muttered to himself, his fingers unconsciously rubbing the camera strap. "Completely insane." The grizzly bear had walked 20 yards away, but it stopped again, staring back at Jack. Moonlight began to spill down on the forest, gilding the grizzly bear's silhouette with a layer of silver. In this light, the eyes were even more incredible, they shimmered with a sparkle of intelligence that Jack had never seen in any wild animal. Jack recalled what his mentor, renowned wildlife behaviorist Dr. Margaret Holden, once said, "In the wild, your intuition is sometimes more valuable than your knowledge." But she certainly wasn't referring to following an 800-pound predator into the depths of the unknown forest. The grizzly bear let out that strange whimper again, this time with a stronger sense of urgency in the sound. It gouged the ground with its claws, revealing an emotion that Jack could only describe as anxious. "Maybe it's hurt," Jack pondered, "or is its cub in trouble?" Those were the only plausible explanations he could think of, but even then, the behavior of wild animals seeking help from humans was extremely rare and almost unheard of. Jack slowly takes out his phone, trying to record it all, but finds that there is no signal. He sighed and slipped his phone back into his pocket. If he decides to follow the grizzly bear, no one will know where he went. His editor, Catherine, would not find out about his disappearance until 3 days later, and by then it might have been too late. "Reason tells me I should turn away," Jack muttered to himself, "but if this is really some kind of asking for help." Grizzly seemed to be able to sense Jack's hesitation. It walked back a few steps, slowly and cautiously, seemingly trying to appear unthreatening. Then, it did something even more incredible, it lowered its head, almost in a gesture of submission, and then gently touched the ground with its nose and looked up at Jack again. "Oh my God," Jack gasped, "you're really trying to communicate, aren't you?" For years, Jack has been looking for evidence that animals have more complex emotional and cognitive abilities. He has photographed elephants mourning their dead companions, chimpanzees using tools, and even crows solving complex problems. But this, a grizzly bear showing such clear intentions to communicate, was beyond his imagination. Clouds began to gather in the night sky, obscuring the moonlight. The forest became darker, with only the beam of Jack's headlamp illuminating the path a few meters ahead. The temperature continued to drop, and he could see the white breath he exhaled. If he decides to follow the grizzly bear, he will face dark, cold, and unknown dangers. "I must be crazy," Jack muttered to himself, as he turned on his headlights and adjusted his backpack to make sure the bear spray was within reach. Completely insane. The grizzly seems to understand Jack's decision. It turned around and began to move along a barely visible trail with a steady and determined pace. Jack took a deep breath and began to follow, keeping what he thought was a safe distance, close enough to see the grizzly bear, but far enough to run away if necessary. As they go deeper into the forest, the environment begins to change. The taiga forest becomes denser and the ground is more uneven. Jack noticed that the sounds of the animals around him had decreased, and only the occasional owl cry broke the silence. This unusual silence exacerbated his uneasiness. Something isn't right here, Jack thought, noticing that even the normally active nocturnal insects had become silent. The whole forest is too quiet. Grizzly continues on his way, occasionally looking back to make sure Jack is still following. Its behavior pattern is completely inconsistent with the typical behavior of a wild grizzly bear. It doesn't stop to forage for food, doesn't mark territory, and doesn't even show the usual wariness of its surroundings. It had a clear goal, a place it was eager to take Jack to. As they continued to advance, the terrain became more rugged. The trail begins to climb upwards through a rocky area. Jack's breathing became rapid, and he felt sweat begin to build up on his back, despite the cold night air. "Where the hell are you going to take me?" Jack asked, looking at the grizzly bear's back, his voice loud in the silent forest. The grizzly bear didn't respond and just kept going, but its pace became more aggressive. Jack noticed that its behavior became more nervous, with its head constantly turning and its ears pricked up, as if alert to something. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the treetops, bringing with it a strange smell, a metallic, unnatural smell that was at odds with the scent of the forest's pine and damp soil. Jack frowned, trying to identify the source of the scent. "That's chemicals," he muttered to himself, feeling a pang of unease. This smell should not be found in the primeval forests on the edge of the national park. Grizzly bears also noticed the smell. It stopped, sniffles, and let out a low growl. This is the first time it has shown an aggressive stance, but Jack realizes that the aggression is not directed at him. The grizzly bear is reacting to that smell. "What's over there, right?" Jack asked softly. "That's where you want to take me?" Grizzly turned to Jack, the urgency in his eyes more evident than before. It let out that strange whimper again, and then continued on its way, but with a more cautious pace. As they continued on, Jack noticed that the trees were starting to thin, and, to his shock, some of them looked unhealthy, their leaves turned yellow, and some even withered altogether. In October in Montana, this should not be the case with conifers. "What's going on here?" Jack asked in a low voice, feeling a chill creep up his spine, this time unrelated to the temperature. They walked through the last grove to the edge of a small valley. Jack stopped, shocked at what he saw. In the middle of the valley is a rushing river whose water shimmers unnaturally in the moonlight. The vegetation on both sides of the river bank is visibly damaged and takes on a sickly yellowish-brown color. But the most shocking thing is the sight above the river, a rudimentary wooden bridge spanning the river, crumblingly connecting the two banks. At the other end of the bridge, the silhouettes of some man-made structures are faintly visible, which look particularly strange in the night. Grizzly stopped in front of the wooden bridge and looked back at Jack with an emotion in his eyes that Jack could only describe as a request. It wanted Jack to cross the seemingly shaky bridge and head to the uncharted territory. Jack stands still, his inner conflict reaching its climax. His professional training, rational thinking, and self-preservation instincts all screamed at him to turn away. But another voice, one he couldn't ignore, told him that the unusual grizzly bear had brought him here for a reason, and that reason might be more important than his personal safety. The roar of the river filled the night sky, and the wooden bridge swayed slightly in the wind. Jack took a deep breath and looked at the waiting grizzly bear, knowing that he had to make a choice, whether to follow the voice of reason and turn away, or follow his instincts and step onto that dangerous bridge into the unknown. The wooden bridge looked particularly fragile in the moonlight, like a crumbling scar across the rushing river. Jack stood at the head of the bridge, feeling the shaking of the ground beneath his feet. The force of the river hitting the rocks was transmitted through the ground to his body. The bridge looks like it was built improvised, made of rough logs and hemp rope, with no handrails and barely wide enough for one person to cross. "It's almost suicidal," Jack muttered to himself, the beams of his headlamps shining on the bridge deck, revealing cracks and wear in the wood. This thing could collapse at any moment. Grizzly stood at the entrance to the bridge and looked back at Jack with an expression of near despair in his eyes. It let out that low whimper again, then lifted a huge paw and gently rested it on the first plank of the bridge. The bridge creaked ominously, but did not break. Grizzly glanced back at Jack and seemed to say, "Look, it can take my weight, and it can bear yours." Jack shook his head and laughed incredulously. "Are you serious? You want me to follow you through this death trap?" The grizzly bear didn't move, just continued to stare at Jack, those incredible eyes glinting in the moonlight. Jack felt an inexplicable connection, an understanding that transcended words. The animal was indeed asking for his help, and it was extremely urgent. The roar of the river was loud in the night. Jack shines his headlamp on the surface of the river and notices a strange layer of foam floating on the surface of the water, which takes on an unnatural blue-green sheen in the moonlight. That pungent chemical smell in the air became even stronger. Pollution, Jack realized, the river is polluted. He turned across the bridge, the beams of his headlamps piercing through the darkness and faintly revealing the silhouettes of several metal structures. That's not natural, it's man-made, some kind of facility or equipment. Suddenly, everything began to become clear. The grizzly bear isn't just asking for help, it's trying to uncover something. This forest, this river, is suffering some kind of damage, and this incredible animal somehow understands this and decides to seek human intervention. Jack took a deep breath and felt a sense of responsibility welling up in his mind. As a wildlife photographer, he not only documents the beauty of nature, but also has a responsibility to protect it. If the river is really polluted, if someone is doing illegal activities on the edge of the national park, he has to record it, he has to expose the truth. "All right," Jack said eventually, tightening the strap of his backpack to make sure the camera was securely attached to his chest, "I'll go with you. But I want you to know what you're doing, big guy." The grizzly seems to understand Jack's decision. It nodded slightly, a gesture so human that Jack was shocked again, and then turned, stepping cautiously onto the wooden bridge. The wooden bridge looked particularly fragile in the moonlight, like a crumbling scar across the rushing river. Jack stood at the head of the bridge, feeling the shaking of the ground beneath his feet. The force of the river hitting the rocks was transmitted through the ground to his body. The bridge looks like it was built improvised, made of rough logs and hemp rope, with no handrails and barely wide enough for one person to cross. "It's almost suicidal," Jack muttered to himself, the beams of his headlamps shining on the bridge deck, revealing cracks and wear in the wood. This thing could collapse at any moment. Grizzly stood at the entrance to the bridge and looked back at Jack with an expression of near despair in his eyes. It let out that low whimper again, then lifted a huge paw and gently rested it on the first plank of the bridge. The bridge creaked ominously, but did not break. Grizzly glanced back at Jack and seemed to say, "Look, it can take my weight, and it can bear yours." Jack shook his head and laughed incredulously. "Are you serious? You want me to follow you through this death trap?" The grizzly bear didn't move, just continued to stare at Jack, those incredible eyes glinting in the moonlight. Jack felt an inexplicable connection, an understanding that transcended words. The animal was indeed asking for his help, and it was extremely urgent. The roar of the river was loud in the night. Jack shines his headlamp on the surface of the river and notices a strange layer of foam floating on the surface of the water, which takes on an unnatural blue-green sheen in the moonlight. That pungent chemical smell in the air became even stronger. Pollution, Jack realized, the river is polluted. He turned across the bridge, the beams of his headlamps piercing through the darkness and faintly revealing the silhouettes of several metal structures. That's not natural, it's man-made, some kind of facility or equipment. Suddenly, everything began to become clear. The grizzly bear isn't just asking for help, it's trying to uncover something. This forest, this river, is suffering some kind of damage, and this incredible animal somehow understands this and decides to seek human intervention. Jack took a deep breath and felt a sense of responsibility welling up in his mind. As a wildlife photographer, he not only documents the beauty of nature, but also has a responsibility to protect it. If the river is really polluted, if someone is doing illegal activities on the edge of the national park, he has to record it, he has to expose the truth. "All right," Jack said eventually, tightening the strap of his backpack to make sure the camera was securely attached to his chest, "I'll go with you. But I want you to know what you're doing, big guy." The grizzly seems to understand Jack's decision. It nodded slightly, a gesture so human that Jack was shocked again, and then turned, stepping cautiously onto the wooden bridge. Jack held his breath as he watched the behemoth, which weighed more than 800 pounds, step by step onto the fragile wooden bridge. Each step caused the bridge to shake violently, and each plank groaned in pain under the tremendous pressure. Surprisingly, however, the grizzly bear's movements are unusually light, almost cautious, as if it fully understands the fragility of the bridge. "Unbelievable," Jack whispered, watching as the grizzly managed to reach the center of the bridge. "Now it's his turn." Jack took a deep breath, gripped the strap of his backpack with both hands, and took the first step. The planks immediately bent under his weight with an unsettling crunch. Jack felt a wave of vertigo. There was a rushing river under the bridge, and the water was at least 20 feet above it. If the bridge collapses, he will not only be in danger of falling, but he may also be swallowed up by the water of the river that appears to be heavily polluted. One step at a time, he said to himself, forcing himself to keep his composure. Don't look down. In the middle of the bridge, Grizzly Bear had stopped to wait for him. This behavior once again challenges all of Jack's perceptions of wildlife. The grizzly bear is not only guiding him, but also ensuring his safety. Jack carefully moves forward, carefully testing the strength of the plank with each step. The bridge shook as he moved, but seemed to be able to bear his weight. He had walked about a third of the way and was beginning to feel a glimmer of hope. At that moment, a loud cracking sound pierced the night sky. Jack felt the plank under his feet snap suddenly, and his right leg instantly sank into the bridge deck. Instinctively, he lunged forward, his hands gripping the plank in front of him, his whole body hanging in the air, only his upper body still on the bridge. Damn it! Jack shouted, feeling fear sweep through his body. His camera slammed into the bridge deck, and the beams of his headlamps swayed wildly in the darkness. The grizzly reacted immediately. It moves swiftly but cautiously towards Jack, and the bridge shakes dangerously under its weight. Jack struggled to climb up, but the weight of his backpack dragged him down. No, don't come here. Jack yells at the grizzly bear, fearing that its extra weight will cause the entire bridge to collapse. The bridge will collapse. But the grizzly bear seems to have a judgment of its own. It stopped a few steps away from Jack and did something incredible. It lay down, spread the weight of its body over several planks, and then stretched out a huge front paw in Jack's direction. Jack's eyes widened, unable to believe what he saw. The wild grizzly bear is trying to help him. It can't be, Jack muttered to himself, but he didn't have time to think. His fingers began to ache from his grip on the plank, and he knew he couldn't hold on for long. Jack struggled to reach out a hand and reach out to the grizzly as far as he could. His fingertips could almost touch the massive claw, but it was still a few inches away. Closer, said Jack, gritting his teeth, just a little bit. Grizzly seems to understand. It cautiously moved forward a little, and the bridge creaked dangerously again. This time, Jack's fingers managed to grab the grizzly bear's rough fur. Slowly but surely, the grizzly stepped back and pulled Jack along. Jack felt his body begin to move upwards, and he grabbed the bridge with his other hand to help him climb up. Finally, Jack managed to get back to the bridge, panting and shaking. He knelt there, looking at the grizzly bear who had just saved his life, filled with indescribable awe and gratitude. Thank you, he whispered, knowing that the word was not enough to express his feelings. Grizzly stared at him, his eyes glinting with what Jack was sure understood. Then, with a slight nod, it turned and continued to move towards the other end of the bridge, moving more cautiously. Jack took a deep breath and checked his gear. The camera is miraculously intact, although the backpack is somewhat worn. He stood up, carefully avoiding the broken plank, and continued on. The rest of the journey seems eternal. Every step can be fatal, and every plank can be the last. Jack's heart was thundering, sweat soaking through his shirt, even though the night air was bitterly cold. Finally, after a seemingly never-ending fear and tension, Jack's foot touched solid ground. He staggered off the bridge, his legs limped from tension, and he almost fell to his knees. I did it, he gasped, looking up at the grizzly bear waiting for him. We did it. The grizzly bear stood there, the moonlight illuminating its massive figure. It didn't celebrate, it didn't rest, but immediately turned ahead, that mysterious destination hidden in the darkness. It glanced back at Jack, and the urgency in his eyes was more pronounced than before. Jack understood the message. They have overcome an obstacle, but the real challenge is just beginning. He adjusted his headlamp to make sure the camera was ready, then nodded. Lead the way, he said to the grizzly bear, with a new determination in his voice. "Let's see what you want to show me." The grizzly turned around and began to follow a barely visible trail, with Jack following close behind. As they approached the metal structures, the chemical smell in the air became stronger, irritating Jack's nose and throat. They are approaching the truth, whatever that may be. Jack knew that what he was about to face could be a discovery that would change everything, not only about the secrets of the forest, but also about the deeper connections that might exist between humans and wildlife. As Jack and Grizzly make their way through the last bushes, the truth is finally laid bare in front of them. In the moonlight, a makeshift industrial facility occupies a clearing in the forest. Several huge metal tanks are connected to a complex system of pipes that extend directly into the river. The air was filled with a pungent chemical smell, and several work lights cast an eerie glow in the darkness. "Illegal mining operations," Jack whispered, immediately recognizing the equipment. "They're using cyanide to extract gold and then discharge it directly into the river." Grizzly stood beside Jack and let out a low growl. Only then did Jack notice that on the other side of the facility, there was a simple cage. Inside were two cubs huddled inside, their hair stained with some kind of black substance, looking weak. "Your child," Jack looked at Grizzly in shock, finally understanding everything. "That's why you came to me." The grizzly bear's eyes showed pain and despair, and it nodded slightly, letting out that heartbreaking whimper again. Jack felt a surge of anger welling up in his heart. These people are not only polluting the water in the national park, but they are also capturing wildlife. He had to act. He carefully approached the facility, making sure he wasn't detected. Through the camera's telephoto lens, he captures every detail clearly: illegal equipment, polluted rivers, imprisoned bear cubs, as well as the faces of staff and vehicle license plates. He even found several documents with the name of the company and the signature of the person in charge. "The evidence is overwhelming," Jack whispered to the grizzly, "but we need more." He took out his phone and tried to send a message, but there was still no signal. He had to go back to the place where there was a signal to contact the authorities. But first, he needs to rescue the cubs. Jack observes the surroundings of the facility and notices that only 2 workers are on night duty, and they appear to be drinking in the rest area. This is his chance. "I'm going to save your baby," Jack said to Grizzly, "but I need your help to create some distractions." Grizzly seemed to understand what Jack meant. It nodded, then quietly circled to the other side of the facility. Jack waited, his heart beating like thunder. Suddenly, a loud roar came from afar, followed by the sound of metal clashing. The 2 workers immediately jumped up, grabbed their flashlights and rushed in the direction of the sound. "Well done," Jack whispered, quickly moving towards the cage. "The cage is locked with a simple padlock." Jack looked around and found a crowbar. He tried his best to pick the lock, and the cage door opened. The 2 cubs cowered in the corner, apparently frightened. "It's all right, little ones," Jack whispered, "your mother has come to your rescue." Just then, the grizzly bear appeared next to the cage. The cubs immediately recognized their mother and let out a cry of excitement. The mother bear carefully lures them out of the cage and gently touches them with her nose to confirm their condition. The shouts of workers could be heard in the distance, who had apparently spotted the intruder. Jack knew they had to leave immediately. "We've got to go," he said to Grizzly, "come with me." Jack leads the grizzly family in a different retreat, avoiding the dangerous wooden bridge. They walked through the dense forest, away from the facility, until the shouting completely disappeared into the night. When they reach a safe distance, Jack stops to check on the cubs. They appear weak but have no visible injuries, mainly due to the fact that their hair has been soiled by some chemical. "They need cleaning and food," Jack said, "but I think they'll be fine." The she-bear looked at Jack with indescribable gratitude in her eyes. It gently approached Jack and cautiously touched his hand with its nose, a gesture that contained deep trust and gratitude. "You're welcome, big one," Jack whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. "We're friends now." The sky began to glow, and dawn was coming. Jack knew he had to get back to the camp as soon as possible and contact the authorities. But before that, he needs to say goodbye to this incredible family. "I've got to go," Jack said to the grizzlies, "and I'm going to make sure those people pay for what they've done. This forest and river will be protected and you and your children will live safely here." Grizzly looked at Jack again, eyes that seemed to contain the wisdom and understanding of the entire universe. It nodded slightly, then turned around and disappeared into the depths of the forest with its children. Jack stood there, watching them go, filled with awe and emotion. He knew he had just experienced the most incredible night of his life, an experience that would forever change his perception of wildlife. 3 months later, the cover of National Geographic magazine featured a photo of the grizzly bear taken by Jack, titled "Weeping Bear, a Rescue Story Across Species." Jack's report and photos caused a national sensation, leading to a thorough investigation and prosecution of that illegal mining company. Environmental groups and the government have teamed up to clean up polluted rivers and expand the protection of national parks. Jack founded a wildlife conservation foundation focused on researching animal intelligence and promoting the harmonious coexistence of humans and wildlife. As for the incredible grizzly bear and its children, park rangers can occasionally see them in the distance, living healthy and free in the forest. Jack never approached them again, and he knew that keeping his distance was the utmost respect for them. But sometimes, when he works in the forest, he feels a presence, a gaze, as if the grizzly bear is still watching over him somewhere, friends from 2 different worlds, forever connected by an incredible encounter. Dear readers, what does this story make you feel? Is it really possible for humans and wildlife to have an understanding that goes beyond language? Are there any mysteries in nature that we haven't discovered yet? If this story touches you, please like and support. Every one of your likes is an encouragement to create. What are your thoughts or feelings? Feel free to share in the comments section. Have you ever had an incredible encounter with wildlife? If you think this story deserves to be seen by more people, please forward it to your friends. Let's spread the message of concern and respect for nature and wildlife together. Follow me for more exciting wildlife stories and nature explorations. Let's go on the next incredible journey.